Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next edition of Tony Talks. I thought it was pretty interesting this week. I've been teaching communications at the Fire Academy as we're trying to transition to online learning. And as we were doing the last lecture, one of my mentors had mentioned during the Battle of Gettysburg there was a pretty important message that was relayed, and it wasn't very clear. And the message was take the hill if practical. So that can kind of be a little bit ambiguous. So I kind of wanted to get into talking a little bit about, whenever we talk to people, whether it's us in public safety or in school or in day-to-day business, if we're not clear with what we're asking or what we're talking about, then it's easy for the lines to kind of get crossed. So again, I want to tie a little bit into the Battle of Gettysburg. Um, so the gentleman who received this order, hold the hill of practical, his name was General Richard Ewell. And he was a Confederate commander. He got those orders from Robert E. Lee on the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg. And what kind of made this a little bit important, as the Confederates kind of ran through town and were able to kind of push back the Union Army, they wanted to take the high ground, which is always one of the first things you want to do in combat. And so that high ground at the time was an area called Cemetery Hill, just a little bit south of Gettysburg. And from where the first clashes kind of took place in Gettysburg, you can kind of see it across town. You can kind of get a better understanding of what they were kind of talking about. So Lee kind of wanted him to push on if he was able to. And there's a couple of things that kind of popped up with Richard Ewell. Great commander. He was brand new to his job. Took over the Stonewall Division, which just a few months prior in May of 1863, this was ran by General Stonewall Jackson. Jackson fell by friendly fire in the Battle of Chancellorsville. So Ewell was recently promoted. So this was like his first big job as he was new to his position. So again, I don't know too much about Ewell, but like anybody else on our first or second day of the job, we don't want to kind of screw up. So um, some of the discussion that kind of came to this is, well, Lee gave him the order, take the hill of practical. So what can that kind of mean? Well, do you want me to do it, or you don't want me to do it, or if I can do it, should I do it? Too many what ifs. And as I talk about what ifs, I will mention that one of the biggest the discussion in general of what ifs in any of history is like a dangerous loaded question. But myself being a big fan of Stonewall Jackson, he kind of brought repeated victories to the Confederate Army up until 1863. So there was this sense of invincibility that the South had, including Lee going into this battle. Some folks say that Jackson would have saw the opportunity and pushed his troops and grabbed the hill, and who knows what would have happened. But again, what we can kind of talk about is the idea that he was able to kind of push so far, and again, we're dealing with not necessarily like mass communication, but back then it wasn't something as simple as picking up a radio and talking to somebody. They had signal corps with guys with flags. They had messengers and folks who would do the running on horseback. So nothing really happened quick as far as getting orders, receiving orders, and acting upon them. So by the time of this, he had the opportunity to kind of take the hill. Nightfall is already kind of coming around, and the Confederates decided to halt. Where again, I kind of mentioned, some folks kind of may think that Stonewall Jackson would have saw the opportunity of flanking the Union Army and made good of it, but they didn't. So, and again, the battle played out as it did. So, who knows what decisions he may have made. So again, I talk about the guy that he took over for. This is again one of my favorite generals in history, Thomas Stonewall Jackson. He got the nickname Stonewall from the first Battle of Manassas. There was another Confederate general named Bernard Bee, who his troops were kind of like retreating and getting fought back. But he kind of wanted to rally his Virginian troops and said, "Look over there stands Jackson like a stone wall." So that's how his nickname kind of stuck, and it almost kind of stuck to the division that he ran. It wasn't necessarily his nickname, but as things go by in history, we all kind of know him as Stonewall Jackson, and not necessarily Thomas or T.J. Jackson as he went by. So as we look back in history, can we really say that Whether or not Richard Earl Ewell would have pushed through and done what Jackson would have done, we may never know. But on the other hand, I think it's pretty safe to say that if you're given the order, take the hill practical, or okay, go deliver this if practical, or go do your job if practical, or go, that's kind of like an obscure, very simple order. So that doesn't mean, well, do you want me to do it if I can or if I can't? So it's always important to kind of be clear with communications. We talk in the fire service. I talk about the ABCs. Accurate, brief, and concise. Was this brief? Yeah, absolutely. Was it accurate? No, not at all, because he's very being vague with it. And then concise. Again, he's not really. Lee isn't really giving General Ewell the information or specific information that he needs for the objectives that he wants met for the first day of fighting on July 1st in 1863. So what we could do is take a look at the other side of this. And I will move along to here we go. Here's what I was talking about. Take the hill if practical. So these are your orders from Lee, and you see at the very north, Ewell's Corps. His division is moving south through the town of Gettysburg. And that's something else that people don't realize. That some people call it the forgotten battlefield. Gettysburg, little town itself, was a battlefield for the first 2 days of fighting. So things kind of went back and forth for a while. But on the first day of battle, here we go. Overview of July 1st. So the Confederate Army, with A.P. Hill on Ewell's right, they were able to kind of push back the Union Army back until that Cemetery Hill, which they wanted to take but couldn't do it. And you see General Reynolds, he was injured or mortally wounded that day. And also you see another name, Doubleday. So if there's any baseball folks out there, you may have heard of Abner Doubleday. I guess he goes on later in the 1800s to kind of create what we kind of know as a modern day version of baseball. So what everyone's kind of want to protect, what the Union wants to protect and what the Confederates want, is that little location just south of the town of Gettysburg where you see those arrows are pointing to Cemetery Hill. So that was the important thing that they were trying to capture. And again, with the kind of non-specific orders of take that hill if practical. So again, that comes back down into time and time again with communications and being able to kind of get our message across, and not only get it across, but have it understood. And you yourself as the messenger getting the feedback that it was understood. Again, with between Ewell and Lee, that really didn't happen on the first day of battle. So we can kind of switch things up a little bit and see, where did some communications in Gettysburg go right? So here I have talked about him, I think last week, Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. He was the colonel of the 20th Maine. He fought for the Union Army, and again, we know if you pay attention or you watch some of the other ones, we talk about the battle on Little Round Top and how it was pivotal of him to hold his kind of position. That's Strong Vincent. I'll talk about him in a second. So Chamberlain was given the orders of on the second day of hold at all costs. So this is a little bit different than probably what you kind of think of what Ewell got received. We'll take the hill practical. This was hold at all costs. So again, when I talk about the ABCs of communications, accurate, brief, and concise. Yeah, it was accurate because this is what I want you to do. Brief, yes, it's literally 4 words. Concise, yes, hold at all costs. You know what you have to do. And Chamberlain kind of understood that, he was on the very southern point of the Union line. And when I show you one of these pictures, you'll see that like how the Union line was almost shaped like a fishhook. So if that rear line fell, then the Confederates would very easily take the ground. So he got that order from this guy named General Strong Vincent, and of course his boss was Meade, who was the overall commander at Gettysburg. But for Pittsburgh folks, there's always tied into the local connection. He was a lawyer from Erie, PA. So I know there's a bridge up there in Erie that you come across, or if you're going out towards like the Bayfront where the Niagara and the museums and stuff and the boats are, you'll see a Strong Vincent Bridge, and that's who the bridge is named after, this gentleman here. So again, here we are. Excuse me. So Meade gets his, Chamberlain gets his orders, hold at all costs, from General Strong Vincent. So if you look to the south, where you see the name Sickles, and you'll see the wheat field, Little Round Top. So that's pretty much where Chamberlain's 20th Maine is positioned. Sickles, that's a whole other discussion. I could talk about this guy for days and days. He's an interesting character. But anyway, he's still the Union's still dealing with Ewell's corps off to the you see off to the right. AP's his corps, and then now Chamberlain is dealing with elements of Longstreet's corps. So of course they fight back and forth throughout the Peach Orchard, which is for the Hampton Battery. Remember when I talked about that? Those were from folks from Pittsburgh. Artillery had fought down through Devil's Den, and then through the wheat field, and then where we now sit, where you see those red and blue arrows, Little Round Top. So that is where Chamberlain is kind of has his back up against the wall. He knows that if his company falls, the whole line, Union line going north, will collapse. So if we kind of zoom in a little bit, this will show us exactly what we're looking at with Little Round Top. So if you can kind of make out, you could see the 20th Maine. They're kind of pivoted on an angle there, and of course they're fighting folks from Alabama, Texas. I always kind of think the crazy ideas of Gettysburg, because I mentioned earlier with the Chamberlain stuff. Here's guys from New York and Pennsylvania protecting their backyard. We have guys from Maine who are 1,000 miles away, and they're all fighting with guys from Alabama, Texas, etc., who are 1,000 plus miles away. But anyway, Chamberlain, back to the story. Hold at all costs. So Chamberlain knew that he was given very specific orders, and at this time, the Texans and the Alabamans had gone back. I think up to like 5+ times they were beaten back. Well, at this point, the Union Army was very low on ammunition. And Chamberlain gave the order to fix bayonets, which to this day in military tactics is somewhat rare. We don't always, you don't always hear that fixed bayonets, and it kind of has a twofold. One, it kind of lets you know that, hey, you know what, we're running out of ammunition, so things are becoming dire. We have nowhere to retreat, we have nowhere to go, so it's literally going to turn into like hand-to-hand combat. We're going to be up against each other face to face, but it's almost kind of given as a morale booster as well. So you know that whenever you hear a commander give the order of fixed bayonets, again, it's very rare to hear these days, that you know that it's enough to motivate your troops to say, hey, you know what, we need to dig in. This is our very last stand, the last chance we have. So what he kind of did there at the end of his the fishhook there is you can kind of see where the 20th Maine is shaped like an L. He decided to use his army almost like a giant gate. In Hardee's infantry tactics, they kind of call it a pinwheel maneuver. So what he was able to do is kind of pretty much just swing half of his company around like a giant gate on the last charge from the Confederates, and it was enough to repel them for the last time. And it saved, it saved his company. It saved the Union line. And then again, there's those million what ifs that happen within history, but this worked. And then, we know as we move on to the third day, that's when we have Pickett's charge and Longstreet's assault and everything else that kind of pans out for the rest of the battle. But, I thought it was kind of fitting that I've been talking about communications these last couple of weeks as a fire instructor online, delivering things online. And then, my mentor of mine mentioned, take the hill of practical as being able to kind of clarify orders. And then, now we talk about what's the flip side of that. So if I don't get good orders, what does good orders sound like? So I kind of talked about what happened with Chamberlain with, okay, hold at all costs. So he's been giving very specific information. So he knew what he had to do. I'm not saying that Ewell didn't know what he had to do, but maybe, things could have been clearer or et cetera. Again, those are things that are lost to the ages and they could be debated, which I'm certainly welcome to hear. So I think that concludes my Tony Talk for today. And then I will be heading to, speaking of Strong Vincent, I will be heading to Erie for the weekend with the RV and the wife. So you could probably expect some Tony Talks involving maybe the area around Erie, and maybe I'll try to look up some stuff with Strong Vincent more than just the bridges upper that's named after him. So again, thank you everybody for listening and subscribing. This is a work in progress as I try to develop some sort of video editing stuff in my Facebook, or not Facebook, well, I share it to there, but my YouTube channel. So all right. Hope everybody stays low and safe, and I will see you all soon. Thank you.